An odd thing happened to me the other day. I was walking down the street when I ran into a small boy, and the boy he asked me what I thought the Fireside Tales was. And I answered him, giving him none too simple of an answer, that I believed it was something that went beyond mankind's comprehension. That it was a place where all the things we think are so important, like money and power and fame and politics, become irrelevant. A place that is almost like its own being, of things that are real or unreal. A place that could have been, and maybe even should have been. And a place that might have more realness to our world than we may at first realize. As I study the scenes of this strange realm, I came across one that I thought you all might find interesting. And it occurs in the most mundane place imaginable, a small town known as Idletown. And this place was about as mundane could be. There was the firehouse and the post office and the library and all the things you would expect to find in the normal 1950s place. And the people there were either children that loved to play outside or parents who loved to go off to work. And indeed it was about as idyllic of a place as you could imagine. Although I suppose that there could be problems sometimes in this place too. Sometimes people would steal, and sometimes people would lie. But all in all, I do believe it was a very happy place. And in one of the houses, on one of the street corners, number 22, there lived a boy named Stanley Matters, and this boy was about as ordinary as a boy could be. He had all of the regular 10-year-old books that you would expect to find on the shelf, like Treasure Island and Don Quixote, and baseball cards, and he had a big picture of an astronaut and a globe. And every day he would get up and do his normal routine. He would put on his baseball cap and get dressed and brush his teeth and go outside and just play all day and on the weekends, and then on the weekdays he would go to school. But anyways, one morning he was getting up and he was doing his routine. He had just put on his baseball cap and his sneakers, and he's walking down the stairs when he stopped for a moment. And he thought to himself that something was off. And he couldn't explain what, because it seemed like just another day in his little idle town. But anyways, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that something didn't seem right. But finally, he had no choice but to just assume that he must be imagining it, and he walked down into the kitchen. And as he entered it, he saw his mother and his father and his sister there, but he immediately knew that there was something wrong with them. For they seemed to be frozen in place, his father with his feet up on the dog and the newspaper in his hand and the pipe in his mouth and his little bathrobe, and the mother who was fixing breakfast, and the sister who was just sitting there reading a book. They were all just standing perfectly still, and Stanley walked up to them and waved his hands in front of their face, but they didn't blink and they didn't breathe. And I think that any normal boy in this situation would have become terrified, I'm sure all of you would have been if you found your family just standing there frozen. You probably would have yelled and screamed and assumed that you'd gone mad. But for some reason, Stanley didn't do this. I don't know whether it was wisdom or courage. But instead, he went up to the front door and he opened it. And he looked outside, and he saw that all of the people out there were frozen too. The postman who was throwing the newspaper, the cat sitting on the fence, the birds in the trees, his neighbor Molly. And he shut the door on this scene, and he walked back into the kitchen. And to his surprise, now his family was moving again. His father was complaining about the war and about politics, and his mother was putting some breakfast on his plate. And Stanley sat down and he began to eat, listening to his father drone on and on. And finally, he couldn't resist but to ask his dad a question, because of all he had just seen. But he wanted to enter it lightly, because he didn't want everyone to think that he was mad. So he said, "Father, I have a question. There's been a lot going on lately, with the nuclear bomb and a man going up to the moon, and I was just wondering, is it possible that we just dreamed all this? I mean, I guess with all of the emotions going, could it be that we're imagining things to be real that never were real? And the father, he put down his pipe for a moment and he said, "Oh, well, I don't know. I suppose you're trying to be philosophical this morning, Stanley, aren't you? Well, um, what do you think? Do you think that the world is real?" And anyway, Stanley said, "Oh, well, I don't really know, Father. I just wanted to hear your opinion." "Oh, my opinion," said the father. "Well, I suppose, Stanley, that you could be right. Maybe the world isn't real. But then again, there's just as likely of a chance that it is real. And I don't think the question really matters very much whether the world is real or not. Either way, all we can do is just live our life and try to be happy with it. And I think that is the most important thing." "Well, I suppose there is wisdom to those words, Father," said Stanley. Yes, yes, you are right. I'm sorry. I just suppose with all the emotions going on right now, I couldn't help but get some crazy ideas in my head." And the father said, "Oh, I don't know. It's not all that crazy. Anyways, I suppose I better be going off to make some drills. And I suppose I sometimes wish myself that the drills weren't real." And anyways, his father laughed at Stanley at this, and then he gave his wife a kiss on the cheek, and he went off to work, and the mother went off to her housework, and the sister went off to talk to some of her friends. And Stanley decided to go out in the backyard. In truth, he didn't really know what to do with his weekend, but he supposed he would find it out as he went along. But as he walked outside, he couldn't help but think about what his father had said, about it being irrelevant whether the world was real or not. And he couldn't help but wonder what had occurred just there. Had it just been in his imagination? He supposed it was possible. But anyways, he walked over and he saw a baseball lying on the ground, and he picked it up, and he thought to himself, if something really is off, if something is wrong, when I throw this baseball, I want it to go right through that rock wall. Anyways, Stanley threw the baseball, and it went right through the wall. Stanley couldn't believe it. He looked in shock for a moment, and I suppose he didn't know what to do. He didn't know if his eyes were playing a trick on him. But as he stood there, he heard a laugh behind him. "Well, Stanley, the average American boy, it's good to meet you. A beautiful work of the man in black, if I ever said that there was." Anyway, Stanley turned around to see a man up in the tree, and the man was dressed all in gray, and he had a smile on his face, a big grin from ear to ear. And the man hopped down from the tree. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am a piece of nonsense in a otherwise logical and balanced universe. I am the man in gray. I suppose you human beings have always sort of sensed my presence here, but very rarely do you ever get to meet one. But sometimes, just to be unexpected, I like to introduce myself to one of its creations." And he lifted up his hand, and Stanley shook it, and he said, "So, were you the one that just made that wall disappear? And yes, and the people glitching in the kitchen, that was my work too. I do like to play around with my brother. You know, it's a sad thing. My brother is always so mean to me. All I ever do is play harmless jokes, and he tries, do you know, to kill me. He tries to stab me and bludgeon my head off, and he says that the reason is because I could hurt his perfect little creations, that I might be of harm to his army. Well, I must say that my feelings are very hurt. I love my brother very much. I would do anything for him. I really wish he would let me be more a part of his system." Anyways, Stanley looked very confused, as I'm sure all of you would be confused and terrified of this creature that had introduced itself into our world without even an invite. And finally he said, What is all this all about?" And the man in gray turned. "It's about you, Stanley. You see, you were something that was created to help a man of the Black's army. become united with this being. And I wanted to make sure that not a single creation of the Man in Black could ever exist without me to play its little pranks. This is my prank on the Man in Black and the Man in Black soldier. I am going to show you the great truth. I am going to show you how everything came to be. And all you have to do is go right through that rock wall, into a place that shouldn't be, but is. And Stanley, he turned and looked at the rock wall, and he said, "Well, what if I choose not to go through? What if I say no? What if I say that I think that all of this is batty?" And the man in gray shrugged his shoulders. "Be my guest. It's your choice, Stanley. It's your life. Whether you want to be a part of the Man in Black, or whether or not there might still be a part of you, a part of every human being that desires me, a part hidden in their mind that was pushed away a long time ago, but that the man and all of its creatures can't quite resist." And the man in gray disappeared at this moment, rather unexpectedly, but you can't expect the man in gray to ever do anything expected. I'm sorry for you folks. He never follows any rules, even from me as a storyteller. But anyways, Stanley stood there, and he was shocked, but as he looked at the wall, he had an idea in his head. He knew what he had to do. He had to find his friends. So he ran off to the playground, and he found them all there just as they probably should be. His friend Carmichael and James and Lily and Winston. And anyways, he ran up to them and he said, "Guys, you've got to come here. There's something incredibly important I have to show you, and you'll just have to trust me till we get back to the house." Well, anyways, the friends all looked around, and Carmichael said, What is all of this? Is this some sort of trick because I bullied you last week?" And Stanley said, No, you've got to see this." Well, anyways, finally they all agreed, and they went to the house, arguing and muttering amongst themselves as kids do, thinking that this might be some trick Stanley was playing. But anyways, Stanley went up this wall, and he didn't actually do it. He was very careful about this. As soon as he said this wall, he reached forward to touch it, and his hand went right through it. Yes, it's still here. Look, everyone, I had the strangest thing happen to me. I met a man, dressed all in gray, who said that he was some sort of glitch in the programming or something like that nonsense. I didn't really understand him. But he said that we could escape and find a great truth. And I've decided that I myself want to go through this. I wouldn't have asked any of the adults. I feel like they might be too much a part of the system. But I wanted to ask you, because we've been on so many adventures together, and I feel like I might need some help through all of this. Are some of you willing to come with me?" Well, anyways, all of them were looking quite shocked, and they all began to examine the thing, making sure that it wasn't a trick, but it wasn't a trick, and none of them were brave enough to actually go through the wall. And finally Winston said, "I don't know what you're playing here, or how you're able to do all this, but I for one think that we should go home, and we should talk to our parents and figure these things out." And anyways, Stanley said, "Well, be my guest, but anyone who wants to come with me can come, because I'm leaving right now." Well, anyways, Winston said that he didn't want to be a part of it, and a bunch of the other kids didn't want to be a part of it. But Lily, Carmichael, and James, who had all been there with Stanley through it all, decided that they would go. And James said, "Are you sure you want to do this? This thing could lead anywhere." And Stanley said, "No, I'm not sure, but I need to find out the truth. With all of these things going on in the world, I have to find out what exactly is our place in it. I think that's the responsibility of all man. I think it's our destiny." And anyways, finally, Lily and James and Carmichael all agreed, although rather hesitantly, and they went through the wall. Well, while all this was going on, a man was sitting in his tower, and he was dressed all in black, but he was not the Man in Black. His name was Terence Phillip, the programmer. And he was looking at this scene, and he was wondering how it had happened. He didn't know about the Man in Gray. The Man in Gray had hid himself from Terence Phillip. But he had called his assistant in, and he said, "Louis, the system is supposed to be perfect as our own universe. How was it that that boy and his friends were able to go through that wall? And Lewis said, "Well, I don't know, but it doesn't really matter. We can just get the backup file and we can restore the whole thing, and they can go out there and get glitched for all I care." Anyways, Terrence said, yes, there's always the backup files. Still, I want to keep my eye on these things. I want to understand where they're going and what they're going to find out. They seem to be still in the system. They're in a system, a backup file that wasn't supposed to be able to access. Anyways, Terrence, he looked at all the numbers and seemed to understand them in a way that none of us could. All the zeros and ones all made sense to him. I have a feeling that something is going wrong here. That we are about to uncover something that goes beyond anything we've understood before. And that is where I'll leave you, with a puppet master brooding over what has occurred. I don't think this is the best place to close off, but I don't want to leave you all. This story is already getting pretty long, and I don't want this to become like the Phantom of Bastille. So I'll just say good night for now. We'll find out what happens to Stanley and his discovery about what was really going on, and what happens with the programmer later. But for now, sweet dreams and good night.